What if humanity never left the cradle of civilization? What if every human being, from the dawn of time to now, still lived in Africa? For thousands of years, humans migrated out of Africa, shaping the world as we know it. But what if that migration never happened? What kind of civilizations would have thrived? What animals would still rule the wild? And how would the world look today if humans stayed where it all began? Africa is where the human story begins. It's home to our earliest ancestors and some of the most diverse ecosystems on Earth. Roughly 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens emerged in Africa, living in small groups, hunting, gathering, and surviving against the odds. These early humans adapted to the harsh yet resource-rich environments of the continent, from the dense jungles to the sprawling savannas. Then, around 70,000 years ago, something remarkable happened. Humans began to leave. Driven by a mix of environmental pressures, resource scarcity, and curiosity, these migrations led us to populate the farthest reaches of the planet. But why did we leave? And what if we never did? In this video, we'll dive into an alternate history, a world where humans stayed in Africa. How would this impact our species, our planet, and even the animals that share it with us? Let's explore how one decision, made thousands of years ago, could have changed the course of history forever. To understand this alternate reality, we first need to revisit the conditions of prehistoric Africa. The continent wasn't just a land of abundance, it was also a land of constant danger. Early humans faced predators like lions, leopards, and crocodiles, alongside the daily struggle to find food and water. But Africa was unique in its biodiversity, providing everything from fertile lands to dense forests, allowing humans to thrive. These resources helped shape our intelligence, adaptability, and survival instincts. But imagine a scenario where these conditions kept humans bound to their birthplace. What challenges would have arisen in a world where the entire human population was crammed into Africa, competing for the same finite resources? To imagine a world where humans never left Africa, we must first consider what might have kept them there. Migration out of Africa wasn't a simple decision. It was driven by environmental changes, resource pressures, and the innate human drive to explore. But what if those pressures had never arisen? What if the climate remained stable, the resources abundant, and there was no significant push to leave? In this alternate timeline, humanity's trajectory would look radically different. For starters, the entire global population, nearly 8 billion people today, would be concentrated in a single continent. Africa, while vast and resource-rich, has its limits. A densely packed human population would strain the land and water supplies. Crops, animals, and freshwater sources would need to sustain billions of people, leading to overuse and eventual depletion. The savannas, jungles, and deserts we associate with Africa today might instead be sprawling urban centers or entirely barren landscapes, stripped of resources over centuries of human dominance. Imagine cities springing up in places we now consider untouched wilderness. The Serengeti, known today for its breathtaking wildlife migrations, might instead be a network of bustling human settlements. The Congo Basin, one of the world's largest rainforests, could become a heavily deforested region, its trees cut down to fuel the growth of human civilization. The Nile River, historically a lifeline for ancient Egypt, might serve as the centerpiece of an overcrowded megacity stretching for hundreds of miles. But this overpopulation wouldn't just affect humans. It would radically reshape Africa's biodiversity. Without humans migrating out and spreading their influence across other continents, species outside Africa would thrive without interference. In Europe, mammoths, woolly rhinos, and saber-toothed cats might still roam free. In the Americas, giant ground sloths, mastodons, and terror birds could dominate. These species became extinct largely because humans hunted them or disrupted their ecosystems, but in this alternate reality, their survival would be uninterrupted. Conversely, Africa's iconic wildlife, lions, elephants, giraffes, and countless other species, would face the brunt of human expansion. As humans cleared land for settlements and agriculture, these animals would be forced into ever smaller habitats. Over time, many would go extinct, unable to compete with humanity's overwhelming presence. The idea of an African safari might be unrecognizable in this timeline. Instead of vast herds of wildebeest and zebra, we might only have records of their existence in ancient texts or fossilized remains. Human evolution itself might also have taken a different path. Living exclusively in Africa, early humans would have faced unique pressures that could shape their biology and behavior. For example, in the dense jungles of Central Africa, survival might favor smaller, more agile bodies better suited for navigating thick forests. In arid regions, darker skin tones might become even more dominant to combat the sun's harsh rays, while physiological adaptations to retain water could develop over time. Language, culture, and technology would evolve differently as well. With no migration to spread ideas between continents, all cultural development would occur within Africa's borders. Instead of the diverse civilizations that arose in Mesopotamia, China, the Americas, and beyond, we'd see a highly concentrated network of African cultures. Certain regions might emerge as cultural and technological powerhouses, while others remain isolated and underdeveloped. Coastal areas with access to rivers and fertile land, such as the Nile Delta, might give rise to densely populated city-states, while interior regions face resource shortages and conflict. Speaking of conflict, a densely packed population competing for limited resources would likely lead to more frequent and intense wars. In our real timeline, migration allowed humans to spread out, find new territories, and reduce competition. But in this alternate reality, there's nowhere to go. Rival tribes, villages, and kingdoms would fight over land, water, and food supplies. This constant state of conflict could drive technological innovation, as groups develop weapons and strategies to gain the upper hand. However, it could also slow societal progress, with human energy consumed by war rather than exploration and development. One intriguing consequence of humans never leaving Africa is the impact on global climate. Humanity's migration and eventual industrialization have significantly altered the Earth's environment. Forests were cleared for farmland, fossil fuels were burned to power cities, and countless species were driven to extinction. But in this alternate reality, with no humans outside Africa, much of the planet might remain untouched. The Amazon rainforest could stretch even larger across South America, acting as an even greater carbon sink. Arctic ice caps might melt more slowly, and the air might remain purer without industrial pollution. However, these environmental benefits outside Africa would come at a significant cost within the continent. Overcrowding, deforestation, and agricultural expansion would wreak havoc on Africa's ecosystems. Rivers might dry up, fertile lands turn to dust, and natural disasters like floods or droughts become more catastrophic due to human interference. Humanity's survival would hinge on finding ways to adapt to these challenges without the option to migrate to other regions. Despite these grim possibilities, there's another side to this story. If humans had stayed in Africa, it's possible that the concentrated population and shared resources could have led to a more unified, cooperative species. With no vast distances separating groups, cultures might merge rather than diverge. A single, cohesive civilization could arise, sharing knowledge, technology, and culture across the continent. The political divisions and conflicts we see in today's world might not exist in the same way, as humanity develops a more collective identity. In this world, Africa could become a global superpower, not just a continent, but the cradle of an advanced, unified human civilization. Cities would rise where wildlife once roamed, and technological advancements might occur even faster than in our real timeline, driven by necessity and competition. However, this would come at a tremendous ecological cost, as the natural world gives way to humanity's dominance. The question remains: would this world be better, worse, or simply different? And what lessons can we learn from this alternate history about the choices humanity made, and the path we continue to carve for our future? To fully explore the idea of humans never leaving Africa, we need to dig deeper into how such a scenario would have reshaped our civilizations, the natural world, and even the way we evolved as a species. In this alternate reality, humanity remains confined to its birthplace. The rich, diverse landscapes of Africa, spanning rainforests, deserts, savannas, and highlands, become the backdrop for everything humans accomplish. Without migration, the earliest humans would remain concentrated in Africa's fertile regions, likely around rivers and areas rich in food sources. The Nile, Niger, Congo, and Zambezi rivers would become lifelines, just as the Nile became central to the rise of ancient Egypt in our real timeline. Over thousands of years, these regions would transform into hubs of human civilization, with settlements growing into cities as populations increased. But unlike in our timeline, there would be no Mesopotamia, no Indus Valley, no Americas to offer new frontiers. The entire developmental trajectory of civilization would focus on Africa's ecosystems and resources. This concentration would lead to explosive population growth, constrained by the physical boundaries of the continent. By modern standards, Africa is vast, spanning 30 million square kilometers, but even this would struggle to support billions of humans over time. As settlements expand, the competition for land and resources would escalate. The most fertile lands along rivers and coasts would become highly contested, leading to wars between rival groups, tribes, and early kingdoms. Warfare would likely accelerate technological development, as the need for advanced weaponry and defensive strategies drives innovation. In our real timeline, humans migrated in waves, spreading out and relieving pressure on any single region. This migration allowed different groups to experiment with new ways of life, developing unique cultures and technologies. But in this alternate reality, with all of humanity concentrated in Africa, such diversification would happen within a much smaller geographic space. Cultures might evolve more quickly, blending with one another as people are forced into closer contact. Instead of the vast cultural differences we see today between continents, we might see a unified set of traditions, beliefs, and languages spread across the continent, punctuated by regional variations. The lack of migration would also mean that humans would need to adapt exclusively to Africa's environments. In arid areas like the Sahara, people might develop biological adaptations to cope with extreme heat and scarce water supplies. Perhaps their bodies would evolve to retain moisture more efficiently or sweat less. In dense rainforests, humans might become smaller and more agile, better suited to navigating the undergrowth. Evolutionary pressures tied to disease would also play a significant role. Africa's tropical climate is home to countless diseases, malaria, yellow fever, and countless others, that humans have historically fought to survive. Living exclusively in Africa, humans would face prolonged exposure to these pathogens, potentially leading to stronger immune systems or other adaptations. But this evolution would come at a cost. Disease might also limit population growth, creating natural barriers to expansion. Periodic outbreaks could devastate entire settlements, stalling the development of larger civilizations. In our real timeline, humans who migrated out of Africa were able to escape some of these tropical diseases, but in this alternate reality, there's no escape. Communities would need to rely heavily on innovation to combat disease, potentially leading to the early development of medicine, sanitation, and public health systems. The natural world would also be profoundly affected by humanity's confinement to Africa. Without human migration, the ecosystems of other continents would remain untouched by our influence. North America, South America, Europe, Asia, and Australia would be home to thriving populations of megafauna that went extinct in our timeline due to overhunting and habitat destruction. In North America, mammoths and mastodons would roam freely across vast plains. Giant ground sloths would dominate South America, alongside fearsome predators like saber-toothed cats. In Asia, enormous creatures like the woolly rhinoceros would thrive in cold climates, while Australia's marsupial megafauna, including giant kangaroos and diprotodons, would continue to evolve without human interference. Birds like the moa in New Zealand and the dodo on Mauritius would remain safe from extinction, as humans never reach these isolated islands. The absence of humanity on these continents would allow their ecosystems to flourish in ways we can only imagine today. On the other hand, Africa's ecosystems would bear the full brunt of humanity's dominance. In our timeline, the migration of humans out of Africa allowed wildlife on the continent to recover and adapt to human activities. Predators like lions, leopards, and hyenas learned to coexist with human populations by avoiding direct contact or preying on livestock instead of humans. But in this alternate reality, where humans remain in Africa and spread across every corner of the continent, wildlife would face unprecedented challenges. Large herbivores like elephants, giraffes, and buffalo would lose their habitats to expanding human settlements. Predators would find themselves hunted to extinction as humans seek to eliminate threats to their communities. Over centuries, many of Africa's iconic species could disappear entirely, leaving the continent biologically impoverished. The Serengeti, known today for its incredible biodiversity, might instead become a patchwork of human farms, towns, and cities. As Africa becomes increasingly urbanized in this alternate reality, the natural resources that sustain its population would come under immense strain. Rivers like the Nile and Congo, essential for agriculture, drinking water, and transportation, would likely suffer from overuse and pollution. Forests would be cleared for farmland, leading to soil erosion and desertification. The Sahara Desert, already vast, could expand further south as overfarming and deforestation accelerate its spread. This environmental degradation would create cycles of scarcity and conflict. As resources dwindle, human populations would face the same pressures that drove migration in our real timeline, except, this time, there's nowhere to go. Conflicts over water, arable land, and access to resources would become commonplace, potentially stalling human progress. Advanced civilizations might rise and fall in waves, their fates tied to their ability to manage Africa's finite resources sustainably. Yet, despite these challenges, the concentration of humanity in Africa could also lead to extraordinary advancements. In our timeline, technological development was often uneven, with isolated civilizations advancing at different rates. But in this alternate reality, where human populations are in constant contact, the spread of ideas and innovations could happen much more rapidly. The invention of agriculture, for example, might occur simultaneously in multiple regions, accelerating the development of complex societies. The pressure of living in a confined space with limited resources could drive humans to innovate in ways we haven't seen in our timeline. Renewable energy sources, water conservation techniques, and advanced agricultural practices might emerge far earlier in this alternate reality, as necessity becomes the mother of invention. Societies might develop a deeper understanding of ecology, learning to balance human needs with the preservation of natural resources, an understanding that has often been lacking in our real timeline. Culturally, Africa could become the epicenter of human achievement. Without the vast distances that separate civilizations in our world, cultural exchange would be constant and widespread. Art, music, and literature might flourish as people from different regions share their ideas and experiences. Instead of the fragmented histories we study today, we might see a single, unified narrative of human progress centered on Africa. This concentrated development could make Africa the most advanced region on the planet, a global superpower long before the modern era. But this dominance would come at a cost. The natural world would be irrevocably altered, and the planet's most biodiverse continent might become its most overexploited. The tension between human progress and ecological preservation would define this alternate reality, just as it defines our real-world struggles today. Would this world be better or worse than the one we know? That's a question without a clear answer. What's certain is that this scenario offers us a fascinating glimpse into how small decisions, like the choice to migrate, can have monumental consequences for humanity and the planet as a whole. To continue imagining a world where humans never left Africa, it's essential to explore not only how civilizations and ecosystems would evolve but also how the global balance of power, culture, and technology would be reshaped. If humanity remained confined to Africa, the ripple effects would touch every aspect of life, influencing everything from human innovation to the fate of other continents and species. First, let's consider the evolution of civilizations in this alternate timeline. The earliest human settlements in Africa were often located near water sources, like rivers and lakes, which provided the necessary resources for survival. In our timeline, these regions gave rise to powerful civilizations like ancient Egypt along the Nile. However, in this alternate history, the concentration of humanity within Africa would amplify this process. The Nile might not just host one advanced society but instead become the centerpiece of a sprawling network of city-states, each vying for control of its waters. Beyond the Nile, other rivers like the Congo, Niger, and Zambezi would play a crucial role in shaping the continent's development. Fertile lands around these rivers would attract settlers, leading to the growth of agricultural societies. These civilizations would likely develop advanced irrigation techniques to maximize crop yields, particularly as populations grow and competition for resources intensifies. But such intense focus on these rivers could lead to overuse, with devastating environmental consequences. The demand for resources would drive technological innovation at an accelerated pace. Tools for farming, hunting, and construction would become more sophisticated as humans sought to adapt to their growing numbers. Metalworking might develop earlier in this timeline, as the need for durable tools and weapons becomes critical. Regions rich in mineral resources, such as South Africa's gold and diamond mines, would become centers of trade and political power. The control of these resources might lead to the rise of powerful kingdoms, comparable to the great empires of our timeline, such as Rome or China. The political landscape of this alternate Africa would likely be shaped by constant competition between these emerging powers. In our timeline, humanity's spread across multiple continents allowed civilizations to develop in relative isolation before coming into contact with one another. This often delayed conflicts and allowed for unique cultural developments. But in this alternate history, where all of humanity is concentrated within a single continent, contact between groups would be inevitable and constant. This proximity would lead to frequent wars over land, water, and resources, as well as opportunities for cultural exchange and cooperation. Warfare could drive rapid advancements in military technology, from improved weapons to defensive architecture. At the same time, shared borders and overlapping trade routes would foster the spread of ideas, resulting in a rich and unified cultural heritage. Over time, certain regions might dominate as cultural and political hubs, while others remain marginalized due to their lack of resources or strategic importance. The physical geography of Africa would also play a significant role in shaping the continent's civilizations. Coastal regions, with access to the ocean, would have a natural advantage in trade and communication. Ports along the Mediterranean, the Indian Ocean, and the Atlantic could become bustling centers of commerce, linking different parts of Africa and allowing for the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies. However, interior regions, especially those surrounded by deserts or mountains, might remain isolated, limiting their development and forcing them to rely on local resources. Overpopulation would become a persistent challenge in this alternate reality. While Africa is vast, its resources are not infinite, and the demands of a growing population would push the continent's ecosystems to their limits. This strain would be felt most acutely in regions with limited arable land or freshwater, such as the Sahara or the Kalahari Desert. These areas, already inhospitable, might become entirely uninhabitable as populations expand and climate change intensifies. The environmental consequences of human concentration in Africa would be profound. In our timeline, the migration of humans to other continents allowed for the relatively balanced use of global resources. But in this alternate timeline, the overexploitation of Africa's ecosystems would lead to widespread deforestation, soil depletion, and the extinction of countless species. The iconic wildlife of Africa, from lions and elephants to giraffes and rhinoceroses, would be particularly vulnerable. As human settlements expand, these animals would lose their habitats to agriculture and urbanization. Predators, seen as threats to livestock and human safety, would be hunted relentlessly, driving many to extinction. Over time, Africa's biodiversity would be drastically reduced, leaving the continent ecologically impoverished. The Serengeti, once a symbol of untamed wilderness, might instead become a patchwork of farms and villages, its wildlife reduced to memory. Interestingly, the lack of human migration could also have unexpected consequences for the global environment. In our timeline, industrialization and urbanization, driven by humanity's spread across continents, have had devastating effects on the planet. Forests have been cleared, fossil fuels burned, and countless species driven to extinction. But in this alternate reality, much of the world beyond Africa would remain untouched by human activity. Without humans to disrupt their ecosystems, the continents of Europe, Asia, the Americas, and Australia would remain wild and unspoiled. Megafauna like mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and giant ground sloths would thrive without the threat of human hunting. Forests would cover vast stretches of land, acting as carbon sinks that mitigate the effects of climate change. Rivers would flow freely, unpolluted by industrial runoff, and the air would remain cleaner in the absence of factories and vehicles. This untouched wilderness could lead to the evolution of entirely new species. Over thousands of years, animals might adapt to fill ecological niches left open by the absence of humans. Birds might grow larger, mammals more specialized, and ecosystems more diverse. In this way, the continents beyond Africa would become havens of biodiversity, standing in stark contrast to the heavily urbanized and ecologically strained environment of Africa. But despite the environmental challenges, humanity's concentration in Africa could also lead to extraordinary cultural and technological achievements. In our timeline, the spread of humans across continents often slowed the exchange of ideas and technologies, as vast distances and natural barriers isolated civilizations. But in this alternate timeline, with humanity confined to a single continent, the constant interaction between groups could accelerate the pace of progress. Language and culture would evolve differently in this scenario. Instead of the hundreds of languages and dialects spoken across the world today, we might see a smaller number of dominant languages emerge, shaped by centuries of trade and communication. Similarly, cultural practices and traditions might blend over time, creating a shared African identity that unites the continent's diverse peoples. This unity could have significant political implications. In our timeline, Africa has been divided by colonial borders and internal conflicts, which have hindered its development. But in this alternate reality, the absence of external powers and the shared history of humanity might lead to greater cooperation and cohesion. A unified Africa, with its combined resources and knowledge, could become a global superpower, driving innovation and shaping the course of human history. Technologically, the challenges of living in a confined space would drive humans to find creative solutions to resource scarcity and environmental degradation. Renewable energy sources, water conservation techniques, and sustainable agriculture might develop far earlier in this timeline, as necessity forces innovation. Societies would need to learn how to balance human needs with the preservation of natural resources, creating systems that are more resilient and sustainable than those in our timeline. However, this rapid progress would come with its own set of challenges. The strain of overpopulation, environmental degradation, and social inequality could lead to periodic collapses, as civilizations rise and fall in response to their circumstances. These cycles of growth and decline would shape the trajectory of human development, creating a complex and dynamic history that reflects the best and worst of humanity. In the end, this alternate reality offers both opportunities and challenges. While the concentration of humanity in Africa could lead to extraordinary cultural and technological achievements, it would also come at a tremendous ecological cost. The natural beauty and biodiversity of Africa, so central to its identity, would be sacrificed to sustain a growing population. At the same time, the untouched wilderness of other continents would offer a haunting glimpse of what the world might have been like without human influence. This scenario forces us to confront difficult questions about our relationship with the planet and each other. What responsibilities do we have to preserve the natural world? How can we balance human progress with the needs of the environment? And what lessons can we learn from imagining a world where humanity took a different path? The answers to these questions may help us navigate the challenges of our own timeline, as we continue to shape the future of our species and the planet we call home. The impact of humanity never leaving Africa wouldn't just be felt within the continent. It would ripple outward, shaping the rest of the planet in ways that would make today's world almost unrecognizable. This alternate reality reminds us of humanity's resilience and adaptability, but also highlights the importance of exploration in shaping our world. It challenges us to value the delicate balance between progress and preservation as we continue forging our path on this interconnected and fragile planet.